I'm Luca Giliberti, contributing writer for Gold Derby, and I'm joined today by Zachary Galler, one of the cinematographers of Apple TV Plus's new limited series, Lessons in Chemistry. So Zachary, you shot 4 episodes of the show, the first two, and then the fifth and sixth installments. And I read that it was very important to you to opt for a simpler and less contrived approach when it came to shooting this series. So to start things off, I'd be really interested to hear from you. At one point in the process, you really settled on that approach and why you believe that it would enhance the storytelling.
We opted for a simpler approach in Lessons in Chemistry than a lot of other TV because we wanted to sort of do the story justice. We knew that we were doing a project with a book that had been like a global phenomenon and that people love this story. And it felt like it didn't need us to add to that. Plus, we had these great actors, Brie Larson and Lewis Pullman. And I think we knew that if we could capture their performances, and as we saw their performances and how good they were, we were sort of like, we're like, yes, we made the right choice. We had originally planned for some sort of extraneous food stuff and things that were leaning into the food and the science of it. It was funny when I saw Oppenheimer, I was like, I'm so glad we didn't try and do this because Oppenheimer's so good. And we would have been, doing it at a much less amazing scale, probably. But it was, the idea was that kind of stuff, to see the chemistry of cooking. We felt like we needed to maybe show that visually, but then luckily, when the character just really came to life and jumped off the screen and was doing all that work for us, I'd say. So we also knew that we should try and sort of subvert the period genre tropes a little bit and wanted to have this feel much more subjective and much closer to these characters and have it be driven by them as opposed to be driven by the period. And yeah, that kind of determined it for us, and we went that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll definitely talk about, the relationship between Elizabeth and Calvin and everything you just mentioned in just a second. But I also think, despite this approach, that's not to say that there aren't some flashier camera movements. I mean, I'm thinking of the very beginning, the very opening of the show, which is this flash forward that shows Elizabeth going to work and shows everyone getting ready for this first taping of Supper at 6. And it appears to have been shot in one uninterrupted take. So talk a bit about, if that is indeed one uninterrupted take, and if so, why you and Sarah Adina Smith, who directed the episode, chose to open the story in that fashion.
We chose to do the opening oneer, we'd call it, because it felt like we wanted to immediately try and immerse the viewer into the story and just sort of like drop off the roller coaster right away. It was not, so there was a little bit of camera trickery. I will say there was no CGI involved in making the shot work, though. There was a little bit of VFX stuff to replace. We were sort of like out East LA. It was a former beauty salon that our amazing production designer Kat Smith transformed into this 50s small TV station. So it was in a slightly industrial area and some train tracks and stuff, and the VFX cleaned up that stuff and added 50s cars. But we got out there and the parking lot was perfect, and there were these studio doors, and we had the studio for the show built on the stage, and we just worked with Kat to get the transition between the stage and the location right. So we have this big crane shot that we timed out. Our amazing AD Chris Kolpeck timed out for us, and it swoops in, and then we actually used a cross, just a lens cross, to blend them together to get us into the building. And Kat reproduced that segment of the move perfectly. And so there's actually one more blend also in there. Well, when the studio manager is kind of going around the stage in the last moment, they were able to blend two takes together as well. So it goes from techno crane, and then we transition over to Steadicam. And yeah, I'd like to say that it was as practical as physics would allow us to do it.
Yeah, and you know what I really like about that sequence is that I didn't even notice it was an uninterrupted take the first time around. It was not until I went back into the episode to prepare for this interview that I really noticed, oh, this is actually one take. But at the same time, what this sequence does, or the way you shot it, it lends such an effervescence to the show, an effervescence that I think runs through the series like a common thread. And that's why I really like the beginning. It's very dynamic. It
Thanks.
immediately yeah, immerses you into the world.
That was the hope. So I'm so happy to hear you say that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, like we kind of alluded to, the two of the episodes that you shot are the first two, and they're really all about this blossoming romance between Elizabeth and Calvin. And I guess I'd be curious to hear from you how the camera really helped capture the growing intimacy between these two characters in these first two episodes.
I think the camera helped to capture the relationship that was growing between the two characters by by being with them. And I think in shooting a sort of a romance or a blossoming romance or however we want to call it,
Mhm.
you have your personal experiences, and I think you to draw from, right? Or like what you how you choose to see what you're seeing. And I think it really was hopefully about those moments. I think that everybody can remember in their relationships, and everybody's memory works differently, I imagine, but there's kind of the snippets that you have of your relationships, and hopefully trying to tap into something like that, tap into some sort of memory from the past, and tap into that nostalgia that people have for the relationships in their lives, which was sort of like, I feel like we were just led there by Sarah Dina Smith, the
Mhm.
director, the performances that Brie and Lewis turned in. It was, every time you start a new show, you don't know what's going to happen when you get on set. And yeah, it was kind of electric right from the beginning, I'd say. So it also allowed us to be, it was one of the things that allowed us to be simpler with the camera, that we knew that these performances were as strong as they could be. And
Mhm.
we didn't have to leave a lot of options for the edit. There were options for the edit, of course, for pacing and tone and things like that, but we could get away with doing a oneer, or we could get away with doing very
Mhm.
minimal coverage because we knew that the story is good and the acting is great, and people are enthralled by it. They don't need to look away and have their attention sort of kept. You don't need to use the edit to keep people's attention when the performances are as good as they are.
Totally. And you know, I want to go back to what you said about capturing like specific moments that you might remember from a relationship, because one of the scenes that reminds me of that, and one of my favorite scenes of the entire show, is that scene between the two of them on the dock in the second episode, in which you have like this almost slightly saturated sunlight, really not just complementing, but kind of highlighting or illuminating their white clothing, their white towels. I find there's something almost ethereal about that scene and something that really makes it stand out. So I guess what were the conversations between you and the costume department in terms of how you wanted that specific scene to present itself? Because I feel like it's a scene that a lot of people remember and have talked about.
Mira and the costume designer was just so brilliant from the very beginning, and I think we were always talking a little bit about like talented Mr. Ripley and things like that, and the she did such immaculate research that it was kind of not even a question, what the uniform would be and what it should be, and it of course fit so perfectly in with the location. The thing that's
Yeah.
funny was really funny about shooting that was that while we were there shooting it, I was like, this is weird because it looks like it's green screen. Like it looks fake, how sort of like perfect the background is. And
Right.
I was almost just like, I hope people don't think we shot this in a studio. Like because the California, the backdrop of that was like this, it was this lake out in San Dimas that was just, it was perfect. And yeah, it was we got lucky with the weather that day, and it was technically a hard shoot because of course when you shoot on a TV schedule you have to lump sort of all the water stuff had to go in at the same day, so we pick
Mm.
what we can control and what we can't control out on the water. Very tricky, but yeah, we hit it at the right time of day, and got lucky with the weather, and just the costuming is really great and perfect for that. scene and the vulnerability that they feel there. It's great.
Like you said, it's really the vulnerability in that scene that stands out. And even if you think about The Color of White, I kind of thought of it as their common love of the lab of chemistry, because that it's obviously what it reminds me of. So yeah, it's a very, very memorable scene.
I think there's
Um,
something interesting about that scene too, is that it's almost the first time the sky is open.
yes.
There's a lot of space around them, and it's suddenly becoming much more beautiful. I think we got a lot of like pretty things, but for the moment of their first kiss, where they finally, this tension is going to finally come to a culmination, it was yeah, inspired choice by the director and locations, and it was great. It worked out well for everybody.
Yeah, and I mean that scene is even more is kind of devastating in hindsight, because let's talk about the end of the second episode,
Yeah.
which is when Calvin is fatally struck by a bus. And I talked to Matthew Barbato, who co-edited that episode. I talked to him last week, and he said that he and his co-editor Jack Cunningham really wanted to make sure that the lead up to the accident didn't already give away Calvin's fate, that we were really just experiencing his joy and we're really in the moment with him. So was that also something that was top of mind for you when you were shooting the scene, or what were the conversations between you and Sarah in terms of how you wanted to build to and then shoot that accident?
In the lead up to Calvin's death, we had a lot of conversations about how it should feel, how much we should sort of tip our hand beforehand, and how shocking we wanted it to be.
Hmm.
And we decided we really wanted it to feel as sort of run of the mill as possible, and for that reason, we shot, because again, like on TV schedule, when you're at a location, you kind of have to lump all this stuff together, and we had shot a bunch of other running stuff together. And
Hmm.
so we tried to keep it almost as if there was a routine, and this was the thing that you saw a few times, so that the viewers would not have their sort of like spidey senses up about is this, what weird is going to happen? Like, no, strings starting to play beforehand, or weird shots that would tip it off. And I think it turned out pretty shocking and sad. It's because it's always like the characters, you're rooting for those characters to get together so much, and they finally do, and then of course a bus comes from nowhere, and yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I was completely shocked. I actually watched it with someone who was a book reader. So they knew what was coming. It obviously doesn't happen like that in the book, I believe. But so it was sort of interesting, but I did not see it coming at all. And it was a complete shock to me. And what is really interesting is that, after he's hit, the camera not only lingers on, but slowly moves in on 630, their dog. So I guess what was the intention behind that shot? Was it kind of a preview for the third episode, which is obviously narrated by 630, or what was the idea behind that shot?
I think the idea behind the shot was just to link to the next episode, and link to the fact that the little decisions we make in life, like giving a collar as a
Right.
present, have effects, and all linking together with the chemistry. And it was I think you needed something to soften the blow just slightly, a little bit, like that the world of the show was still going to go on, and remember that we were going to have to continue down this path.
Yeah, it's just such a sad moment, but I think it is the perfect way to kind of lead us into the third episode. And I just love the third episode as well. That's such a unique episode. But I do still want to stay on the second one before we then briefly talk about the fifth, because something else that is depicted in the second episode at the very beginning is the traumatizing sexual assault that Elizabeth experiences at the hands of her academic professor in 1950. And I talked to Matthew Barbato again about this as well. But any depiction of sexual assault comes with the risk of being either too slight or being gratuitous. So again, talk to me a bit about the conversations you had with Sarah in terms of how you wanted to frame this theme, because I think point of view becomes a very important factor in it.
I think that scene was definitely a scene where I let other people talk to me about, as a DP, you try and be as empathetic to the characters as possible, and learn as much as you can about the characters, so that you can have the camera support experience. And I think that that was a scene where I did a lot of listening to the people around me also about what would be what it is, of course, that thing of like, how do you depict something terrible without going too far or not far enough, like you said.
Hmm.
And I think, I don't know how empowering it is for anyone, but I think it was empowering that Elizabeth does. I like the pencil stab and then the callback to the pencil stab where she's like, I wish I had more pencils. I
Hmm.
think to be powerless in that situation and at least take a little bit of that back um, was good to see. And that was kind of in my mind what I wanted to focus on more than the grotesqueness of what happened. And I think, throughout the show, generally you see these relationships, gender relationships from the 50s that, we immediately see as outdated now. And something about seeing people have to exist within them in a show where we're so subjective and the characters that we care about like we do.
Yeah.
It does a lot of the work without a lot of work is being done for you without having to be super on the nose about all of it.
Yeah.
And so I think that we definitely shot a couple different versions of that performance. Um, and it's the kind of thing that you have to make a decision about in the edit room where
Yeah.
exactly what you're saying, it's such a fine line and
Hmm.
that you want to get right.
Absolutely. And when you were shooting it, did you already know that they would be, using them also as like brief flashbacks in the first episode? I mean, they allude to it as via flashbacks in the first episode already. Is that something you knew, or is that just something that sort of happened in the editing process then?
Now, there was something that happened in the edit, but I
Okay.
thought it was a great choice to sort of lessen what you needed, the work that you needed to do later a
Yeah.
little bit.
Yeah. Matthew said that it was also kind of to help spell it out for the viewers a bit more because in the first episode you're just getting to know Elizabeth. You
Mhm.
haven't spent 5 hours with her, so it sort of helps you get us into or get viewers into her mindset. So I think that was a very effective way of doing it.
It helped to pay attention to this aspect of that character a little earlier.
Yes,
Yeah.
completely. And on a final note, like I said, I do briefly want to talk about the fifth episode as well, because that's really when we get our first look at Elizabeth kind of headlining or preparing for a taping of Supper at Six, which is a very interesting thing to see. And I guess my question would be, what was it like shooting a show within a show?
Shooting the show within a show was really fun. It was something we had planned on in prep, and from the beginning, we knew we were going to build this stage. We knew it was heading there. We needed it for the opening. It's funny, they built it and then it kind of sat empty for like a month. Well, because
Hmm.
episodes 3 and 4 don't really go there. But yeah, we designed it in prep because the opening scenes that are there, and I worked with my gaffer, amazing gaffer, Len Levine, to find as many period lights as possible because we knew that
Mm.
it's a show within a show, but we were shooting all over the studio. There's stuff in the control room looking down, and you could see the perms and the lights and everything like that. And at first we were like, let's just use all the old lights, like let's go all tungsten, and we quickly were realized the error of our ways, and Len brilliantly figured out ways to sort of retrofit a lot of the old fixtures with new LED technology so that we could work in the sort of speed and way that we're accustomed to now.
Hmm.
Um, Not when you have 100 guys up there able to do all of the technical things we don't want to talk about here, but it's um, having a show within a show like that is really fun. We also had these cameras that the production designer Kat Smith and I got, and had the modern lipstick cameras put in so that we could shoot. It's a tiny chip and it's black and white, and the image is pretty degraded. I think it's pretty low res, so that we could have the images on the back of these old actual cameras from the era. These turret early cameras from the era. Um, yeah, there were just so many fun things about it, and having a set, like being able to show the sort of like behind the set that we're also used to seeing in the business all the time, and being
Hmm.
able to actually show that on camera was sort of a first for me. And it's
Right.
fun just to see. Also, Kat Smith did so much research about how different things, how things were done differently in the 50s as opposed to now. So it was really cool to see all that equipment and be around and think about, like, she had like an old lighting board even,
Oh,
something that I never would have encountered, and it was all analog dimmers with levers. And um, just as someone who started in the lighting department and now works in camera and has been on set a lot, it was really fun. um, and I like cooking as well, so the cooking show aspect was really fun, cool too. It was kind of a perfect thing to be able to play with and mess around with.
yeah, and I mean, it's really interesting to be in that space and also to see all the different colors at play. I thought it was really interesting to be. It really reminds you of so many shows you've actually seen before, and that's what I really liked about it. Well, Zachary, thank you so much for walking me through your process today. That was very fascinating to listen to, and a big congratulations on this series.
Thanks so much.